Hi guys, Ryu here from Blender Bros, and in this video we're gonna be doing two things. One of them, we're gonna be adjusting some settings in preferences to improve our experience in Blender, and also I'm gonna show you how to add add-ons to Blender, and we're gonna be using Blender native add-ons for this, which will make our life much easier. So first of all, let's go to Edit and let's go to Preferences. And this is the menu we've been using in the first video when I showed you how to increase the resolution scale of this UI. But there are other settings here in this menu we're going to talk about that we can change, and they're quite useful, okay? So as you remember, we disabled the splash screen and we changed the resolution on the interface. So that would do us here. And then let's go to Themes. So if you go here to this option 3D viewport, we can change a few settings. So let's click here and Shift A and let's add a cube. And you can see now, if you zoom in, that the cube outline has a specific color. So here we can change a few things. With this object selected, we can, for example, change the color of an active object to a different color, like for example white. I prefer it. It's a bit easier on the eyes, and for me it's easier to see, okay? The same with object selected. I wanted the same color, so I'm gonna go here and make it white. Then again, if you, for example, go to edit mode with tab and you're gonna press, let's say 2 for edges. So now if I'm going to press A to select all the edges, you see that they also have kind of like a warm color. I want them to be white as well, so I can change it, okay? Now the face select, so let's press 3 here and A to select everything. And you have face selected here. We could change it to something a bit more interesting, like for example a bit bluish. And then when you select an edge or whatever, you can really clearly see that difference, right? So let's go to 2 for edge, 1 for vert. Now verts are really tiny and it's difficult to see them. So if you scroll all the way down here, you can change the size of, all these elements here, like for example vertex size. I usually use 7 because it makes it a bit bigger and easy to see. The same with object origin size. I would make it bigger, make it 7, so it's easy to see. Let's scroll up here and change the vertex color also to white, so it's consistent, okay? Another thing that I want to change is the face orientation. Do you remember when we went to this menu here on the top, right? Let me just move this here. And we enabled face orientation. Okay, normally when you have blue faces, okay, you don't really need to know that information because they are correct. All you need to know is when they flipped. So when I click on an object, press tab, then I'm gonna press 3 for faces, select that face, then Alt N and flip it. All I really need to know is where is the red face. So when you click on this here and reduce the alpha on this to 0, you will literally go back to the original color of the user interface, which is gray, and all you'll be able to see is the incorrect faces on your mesh. So it's gonna be simply easier on the eyes. I prefer to work like this, okay? Select everything in face mode, Alt N, and recalculate outside. Press tab to go to object mode, and let's go back here. Now let's go to viewport. In viewport, we're quite fine. If you have a really powerful machine, you could, change the viewport quality to something a bit better. The same with textures, but that really depends on the machine. And then here under lights, I would keep it as is. Editing, I don't really want to touch that. Animation, I don't really care. Add-ons, that's important. Now we're going to enable certain Blender native add-ons here that will enable us to do certain things. Like for example, add-on called Bool Tool will enable us to use shortcuts to create cuts and other types of booleans on our mesh, which makes it a bit more easy and much faster to work with. There's another add-on called Edit Mesh Tools, which is here. This will allow us to manipulate with edges, create offsets, fillets, etc. Really interesting add-on. Then there's another one called Loop Tools, which is very important for working with loops and closing, for example, gaps and bridging geometry with faces. Really useful add-on. Another one is very useful for working with materials called Node Wrangler, we're gonna be using it as well. Then we have a very useful add-on called 3D Print Toolbox, which will allow us to clean mesh very easily with one click when we have some kind of a non-manifold geo. So it means geometry that is basically incorrect or simply unnecessary. Then we have F2 add-on that actually is interesting for working with faces and closing certain areas by adding faces to the mesh very easily. That's a really cool add-on. Another add-on that's really important, it's copy attributes menu. That's really cool. You can, for example, copy modifiers from one object to another with a single click, which is great. So this is kind of like a default Blender settings whenever I start a new Blender. You know, when I download Blender and install it, these are settings I'm actually changing on the first day, okay? Then input here, this is fine. Navigation, that's really important. What you want to do is first of all turn off auto perspective. What it does, it switches between perspective and orthographic view when you switch modes from object to edit mode, and it's really irritating. We're gonna be talking about it during the modeling section, but at the moment simply switch it off, and I actually prefer to stay in the same mode. So for example, if you see here in perspective mode, okay, and if I press numpad 5, I'm in orthographic view. This is kind of like a 2D projection in a 3D view, okay? So that's perspective, that's orthographic, and the shortcut is numpad 5. I would suggest you map it to your mouse because you're gonna be using this a lot. It's very useful for aligning stuff and, for example, running booleans. And this auto perspective, it will switch every time to perspective mode when you switch modes. It's really annoying. Orbit around selection is really essential because whenever you have something selected and you're gonna rotate it, you wanna orbit around that selected object. If you have multiple objects selected, like I'm gonna shift D all of them, press A, I'm gonna be orbiting around the bounding box of all these three objects. This is really useful. The default Blender behavior is extremely confusing, so I don't want that. Let's just Alt G that to move it back. Now here depth is really important too. When you scroll into object without this enabled, you may eventually find yourself struggling and you see that like Blender slows down. I'm keep on scrolling and Blender does nothing. This is really irritating. If you turn it on, you have no problem. You can scroll in and out without any slowdowns. So these options are essential for you know, for your sanity basically, okay? Key map. Now remember we switched spacebar from play to search. That was the first splash screen that we've seen in Blender, and you know, you can always switch it back here, and also you can switch the selection from left to right mouse button. I would never touch it because, you know, that's really cool. So here on the system, first of all, we're gonna do is just type any number here, and by default the max is gonna be 256. These are undo steps, and these are really important. It's up to you how many you're gonna have. It depends on your memory. I'm running 64 gigs, so you know, I really don't care. I want as many undo steps as possible because that saved my ass many times. Here under CUDA, these are your render settings, okay? You do not want to select both, I mean the processor and the card. Regardless of how strong your processor is, card usually gonna be stronger and faster. So if you select this and then you go to render settings and under cycles select GPU compute, you're gonna be fine. Optics is a much faster engine, but I found that many times, you know, there were a lot of errors with rendering, and quite frankly, I don't really, you know, see a point of this. I'm rendering with CUDA settings. Besides, I will show you really awesome settings for compositing and denoising, which will shorten the render times by a few times, okay? So, you know, you could try optics, it's very fast, but like I said, sometimes it doesn't work. Especially I've noticed that I have problems with rendering when I'm using decals with Decal Machine, but that's more advanced stuff, so don't worry about it at the moment. Just set it to NVIDIA and, you know, CUDA, and you're gonna be good. Undo steps really important, so if you can afford, you know, to beef this up to the max, that's great. If not, set it to like 50 or 100, you should be fine, okay? Save and load, I don't really care about that. To be honest, I'm not bothering with this. So this would conclude setting preferences, and I'm going to save preferences and close it. Delete that cube and go here to File, Default, Save Startup File, and we're done. And this will also include the setting here that we changed on the cycles. Next thing, we're going to set the cycles render engine. So like I said, cycles, GPU compute, important. Then here samples, I would set to 250. You could set to 300, but I think 250 will do. Maximum samples, 250, that will do. We don't need the noise, we can turn it off. And then let's scroll down. Let's go to light path and switch it to, I would say, 6, 6, and 6, and 6. This will do. You could go with 8 here, to be honest, as well. Or you could go with 12, 8, 8, 8, 8. So, this would also work. If you're gonna be ever using volumetrics, you'll need to enable this, but don't worry about it, it's more advanced stuff. Keep these on. Then let's go to performance. And here I would recommend you to set it to 256 at start, but I'm going to be rendering in 2048. This is a size of a tile, okay? So size of a resolution of a tile that Blender will render at once when you're going to be rendering an image, which means at this setting, the size of a rendering tile is going to be 2K, so 2048 by 2048. At 256 is going to be a bit smaller, so you're going to be rendering smaller squares. It depends on the card and the system basically, so you need to play with this. Try 256, 512, 124, 248. Okay, if you have a card something like around GTX 1080, you should be fine as 1024. If you have something like RTX 380 or higher, 2048 should be fine. So this would cover all these settings here. We can collapse them so it's nice and clean. We can switch to Eevee. I can show you high quality settings in Eevee. I would go here to 256, viewport render 64, but stay with 16 if your machine, cannot handle it. Enable bloom, ambient occlusion, default settings are fine. Then we're gonna go screen space refraction, turn that off and turn that on. Then we have volumetrics, we don't need it, but if you do need volumetrics, the lower number here, the better quality of the volumetrics, and you definitely want volumetric shadows, okay? It's gonna be a better quality. Performance here, high quality normals. These are super high settings, guys, by the way, okay? So bear in mind, I have a beefed up rig, so 2K here is enough. You don't really have to go with 4. I would turn that on, and other than that, we good. So this would be Eevee settings. Let's go back to cycles because I want this to be my default engine. Let's go back now to compositing, and I will show you how to set up a compositor. This is really important because we're going to be using denoising in our renders for cycles with this compositor. So click here to use nodes and click on that node here, press G and move it in here, okay? And now we're going to go to this tab and we're going to enable denoising data, which will enable these 3 nodes. Click here, press Shift A, and here type noise and check the noise. Click it in here, then connect these two, so normal to normal, albedo to albedo. And we're gonna add one more node, but I'm not gonna plug it in. Shift A and type glare and put it in here. Now this is for creating bloom in cycles, because in cycles you don't really have bloom. In Eevee you can simply, just click that on and you're gonna have bloom, kind of like a amplification of light in your render basically. In cycles you need to use this node. Now this node we need to do a few changes here. We need to change from streaks to foreglow and from medium to high. This is really high settings. And if you want to use it, you simply pop it in here like this, okay? If you want to disconnect it, hold Control and the right mouse button and drag it through these nodes. Move it in here and connect these two. I'm gonna leave it as default, okay? I don't need that, so I'm gonna collapse it, okay? Boom. Right, so that's compositing. Let's go back to layout And then we're going to drag a window out like this. Okay, so click here and drag it out. We're gonna go to shader editor, right? Shader editor. We're gonna go to world, and you'll see two nodes. Okay, these are nodes. Now, because we installed add-on called Node Wrangler, we're gonna click this one, use a shortcut Control T, and click this here and move it. This will create a node tree needed for adding an HDRI image to our Blender. HDRI image is basically used for lighting. It's a 360 degrees image that you can rotate, okay, and use for lighting. We're gonna load one in. You need to download it from internet. Go to a page like, for example, polyheaven.com, and you can download an image from there. They're called HDRI images, okay? The suffix of this image is .hdr, and you can download Abandoned Slipaway. It's a very flat lighting, meaning there's no harsh highlights. It's fantastic basic sort of a lighting for most of your renders, or really good one for setting materials, because there are no harsh reflections. So simply go to polyheaven.com, type Abandoned Slipaway, and download it. I can actually show you how to do this, okay? So if you go to your internet and type Polyheaven Slipaway, and just simply click that, and you see that's the image. And all you need to do is go here and select 4K and download it, right? Once you download it, simply install it the way I do it here. Click it and open image, and it will gonna get added here. So now watch, if I collapse this right here, collapse this, I'm gonna press Shift A and add a cube. I'm gonna go here to materials. I'm gonna add a matte. I'm gonna make it a bit darker, and I'm gonna change it here to metallic, right? Now if I switch to render view, you will see that we have in the background. So if I press my middle mouse button and rotate, you can see that there is actually real lighting in your environment. And now watch this. We can click here and drag it out. We can go here to shader editor. We can change it to world, zoom in, then we can click here and we can rotate it around to change the angle of lighting, okay? The reason why I told you that Eevee is used for previews is because when you switch here to Eevee, okay, the lighting is going to be a bit different, but the rotation is going to be much faster and smoother because the feedback is instant, okay? Now let's reset it to 0. If you want to disable visibility of this render in viewport when you're rendering, what you need to do is go here to film and click on transparent. And that's that, guys. Let's go back to our regular view. Let's delete that cube. Let's collapse this menu, right? Let's set our scene the way we want it. And last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn my cavity on because I forgot to actually turn it on. And with these settings, I'm happy to save it. So I'm gonna go here to defaults and one more time, save my startup file. Every time now you're gonna open Blender, you're gonna see these settings. You don't have to do this again. Also, let's say you have some kind of a scene in Blender. Let me just Shift D that to duplicate it. And you wanna reset your scene to the default scene, right? Let's say you get some windows here open as well, like this, right? You got some different, you know, I don't know, some different workspaces open in here, etc., right? And you wanna reset it to your default scene without closing Blender. The only thing you need to do is go here, new, and general, and done save, boom. And your Blender is gonna reset to the saved preferences that we just, you know, saved a few seconds ago, okay? So again, all the settings of compositor, all the settings of cycles, all the things we changed on the preferences here, everything is saved. All our add-ons as well. So if I go to, for example, add-ons here, right, and I'm going to enabled only, you will see that we have 3D print toolbox, we have our F2, loop tools, pull tool, etc. So everything is the way we set it up each time you open your Blender. So now we are ready to start modeling, guys, and in next video we're gonna start creating some really cool stuff. We're gonna learn how to use Blender in practice to create something really awesome. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.